ask your question, and we'll hopefully make that an efficient way to do this. So bear with us, and I'm now going to turn the program over to Doug Robbins. Doug, you can MC your own group or pass the baton as you see fit.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to try to share my screen here.
And I think I allowed that.
Everybody see this?
Yep, I think we can see it, Doug.
See it? All right, good.
Yep. Yep.
So far, so good. Okay. So really wanted to, really thank Larry and others behind the scenes for helping pull all of this together. Believe it or not, we were actually excited to see so many people in a room to talk about this project. I know it's been a while since we've circled around to talk about the CAP specifically. Obviously, COVID, many delays associated with that were the primary reason. But we're excited today to talk about the updates to the project as a whole, and then talk into some of the things that we want to get into in terms of like next steps. We want to talk about detours and just what's kind of coming up next in terms of the project. So how we're going to do this, we're going to talk about kind of the project summary, just really kind of orient everybody to the project, its origins, the kind of guiding goals that have really driven the design of the project, and then we're going to talk specifically about the kind of two main elements. So it's the South Street pedestrian bridge extension, and then the park at Penn's Landing, which is really the kind of main kind of cap and cover piece over 95. And then we do want to spend some time actually talking specifically about project detours, because we think this will be of a lot of interest to all the neighborhoods that are adjacent to this project and present tonight. And then have some time at the end for some discussion and talk about some of the next steps in the project. So for the project summary, one of the things that we've really tried not to lose sight of is the history of the waterfront in Philadelphia. And when we were, looking, partially due to kind of understand what is underneath the current Penn's Landing, a lot of our kind of due diligence in looking at that came across some of these, amazing photographs. And we suddenly realized that, 120 years ago or so, the waterfront in this part of Philadelphia wasn't an industrial wasteland. It actually was, really for its day, this is a mixed use, multimodal, like epicenter of activity and commerce, and things are happening. And so we really saw that as like, as something to emulate and really something to think about, what the river really used to be. But not lost on the fact that, there was an evolution that happened really, post-war, and the role that I-95 specifically played in reshaping the waterfront, and how Penn's Landing, the development of Penn's Landing came out of that in the 60s and 70s. I know many of you in the neighborhoods adjacent to here, familiar with all of this, and obviously are familiar with the final outcomes of this. What's unique about this project, the CAP specifically, in comparison to some of the other I-95 projects that we're doing, are really twofold. One is the partnerships that are here. And I think it's very unique, and it ends up really serving the design and the purpose of this project well. So we have three main partners. We have the FHWA and the PennDot group, which is really leading the project construction, the infrastructure design, the bridges, and the maintenance of those pieces of infrastructure. And then we have the Delaware River Waterfront Corporation, DRWC, who is going to take on the park programming and two very important things in management and maintenance, specifically of the top side amenities and all that happens on top of there. And then part of all of this too is the city of Philadelphia, who is actually going to be the park owner. And all of this is kind of happening in multiple axes, right? It's all these partnerships are physically stacked and kind of horizontally arranged within this project. So very unique. The other is the purpose of this project. it's not just about replacing aging infrastructure and a lot of the kind of multimodal and more traditional kind of transportation-based reasoning behind doing a project like this, but it also looks to promote the long-term economic development of the waterfront, specifically around Penn's Landing, and to not only support existing uses, but proposed and future uses as well. So what you see in red here, this is the project overview. This is really the boundaries of our work. And you see the kind of two main elements that we'll talk about in more specificity here. First is the Penn's Landing Park that is bounded between Chestnut, Walnut, Front Street, and the Delaware River. And then we have the South Street pedestrian bridge extension that extends the existing South Street bridge across Columbus Boulevard and gets you onto the riverside. Also wanted to touch on what this project team established very, very early on in this project, which were the design goals. And these are really supposed to be our kind of North Stars, that we are really kind of all the design iterations that have happened in the past, all the feedback that we've been getting have been geared around this. First is connections. This is the kind of big one, this is removing the barriers of I-95 and Columbus Boulevard to a certain extent, making those new connections, reconnecting the city with the waterfront, all of those things that people had said from the very early vision days with DRWC said they wanted in something in this area. The other is the development of a public green space, and specifically a signature public green space, one that could really stand up to the other signature green spaces like Rittenhouse and Washington Square in the city. And then maintenance. Not the sexiest of topics or design goals, but one that was extremely important to this project because we knew no matter what we were going to put into the design, we had to make sure that there was a maintenance partner with capacity that could take this on in perpetuity, so that anything that we designed was really able to kind of be maintained through use and seasons and years into the future. The other is flexibility. This is something that was actually geared towards the I-95 corridor and the Columbus Boulevard corridor. And how we interpreted this was a flexibility for future improvements, meaning that whatever we did for this cap structure, and the structure specifically, how it spanned the highways and the roadways, needed to, as much as it could, future-proof any potential future improvements. So how it could accommodate multiple, multimodal improvements on Columbus Boulevard, flexible rearrangements of any future configurations of I-95, whatever that may be. We don't want this project to hurt any of that. We want it to kind of clear the way. And then development. And that was one of the differentiators I talked about before, how this project can really foster development around the river. So here's the schedule. This is kind of breaking it up into kind of large sections so everyone can kind of understand the kind of progression and evolution of the design and the process. Really starting from the seed of the Delaware River Master Plan in 2012. Many of you are familiar with the feasibility study that was done by Hargreaves Jones and others in 2014 with DRWC. That really laid a lot of groundwork for us in terms of what the priorities were, a lot of the public feedback that happened at that point to really shape where we are today, which is in this third, the kind of green slot here on the engineering side. So this is where we're really taking the things we heard were important and we're really designing them and figuring out how we can construct this and build this and get the eventual outcome that we all wanted. You see the kind of "we are here" star there. We're getting close to the end of the engineering phase here. And you see the red phase of construction is set to start very soon. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to all of you today, kind of bring you up to speed with, how feedback in the past has been incorporated into the design to date, and then talk about some of those details within construction. And then obviously, I think something that, Larry had mentioned and that a lot of us are very excited about, which is the opening of this park, this amazing transformative amenity that's going to be along the riverfront. So I'm going to go into some of the details of these elements, and we're going to start first with the South Street pedestrian bridge extension. So in this rendering here, you see in the lower left, that's the existing pedestrian bridge that goes over I-95. And what we're looking to do is actually connect and plug right into that to bring folks on foot, on bike, safely across Columbus Boulevard, across the Delaware River Trail, down to the trail level to provide access both to the the chart house, the basin area, as well as the newly completed Delaware River Trail. Another main component of this was to make this not just a bridge, but something that came out in the feasibility study specifically is to make this a signature bridge, really transform this into a gateway into Penn's Landing. So we can achieve both the multimodal connections piece of it, but really bring the feeling of a gateway and all these kind of signature aspects, and something that we think will transform, Columbus Boulevard and this section of the waterfront. This is a view at ground level, so you can see how it interacts with the new Delaware River Trail. And I'm going to flip to this because this is a photo from not too long ago, where you see the bike path, which this camera is kind of looking at. You see that little jog in the bike path, and if I flip back to this, you can see behind one of the people riding the bikes there. You can also see the little jogs. That is the location right here near Lombard Circle, where the new South Street Bridge, pedestrian bridge, will be kind of crossing overhead and kind of circling down to the bottom off to the left of this photograph. So as we jump to the park at Penn's Landing, the first thing we want to talk about is how you get there. And how you get there depends a lot on what mode you are in. So whether you're in a car, you're on foot, you're on a bike, you're on a bus, how are you getting to this new space? So in yellow, you see all of the city street access. A lot of this is centered around Front Street and various approaches, depending east and west, whether you're coming on Market, Chestnut, Walnut, etc. And you see the SEPTA access continuing along Chestnut Street with 2 stops. The planned loop through what will be the future Durst development between Chestnut and Market Street, and then continuing the SEPTA access back down Market Street into the center city. In green, you see going underneath the cap along Columbus Boulevard is the Delaware River Trail. And then in blue, you see the Esplanade access, and that's the place where you can walk right up against the river. And there's a key connection point we do want to bring up, which is along the frontage, really the front door of the Seaport Museum, and the rear of the Hilton, is that connection from the trail, from the Delaware River Trail, out to the Esplanade. Really important connection, and we think will be a really key public space to kind of bring people down to the river and then be able to come up to the park. Speaking about up to the park, it is worth noting that top piece over 95 is obviously above Columbus Boulevard. So there's vertical access as part of this project. There is an existing ramp and staircase at Market Street. There will be a planned vertical access along the edge where the Durst development will happen through here. And then on the Walnut side, we have a staircase and an elevator there to provide ADA access. Zooming in kind of into the park, once you kind of get into it, is to look at how folks can kind of move around here. And one thing we did want to address is the role of bicycles in and around the park. This is something we've been coordinating a lot with our stakeholders and various city agencies, and really trying to understand the balance of the need and what the role the park should play in the atmosphere on the park. You see those little icons. There is an abundance of bike parking that is strategically located where we think people will most likely want to arrive at the park and dismount and enter the park. And then you see where there's the Delaware River Trail and the loop bikeway, which comes along Chestnut and goes through that loop over to Market through where the Durst development is, those being dedicated spaces for bike. But the other two, the kind of lighter teal and the blue along the Esplanade, are shared spaces, and it's intended that those spaces would be slower, and so that people would be walking their bikes because it would be mixed traffic with pedestrians. So that is important, an important distinction to make here. Once you get into the park is very purposely designed to be extremely porous from a pedestrian standpoint. You'll be able to enter at multiple points along the Front Street, kind of accounting for the grade, where today, if you've been out there where the current memorials are, the current cap is, because of the grade difference in the structural depth there's a break, there's a little retaining wall, 3 or 4 feet, we've worked very hard to eliminate that wall where possible, to incorporate a kind of seamless entry from Front Street. Now, there is a lot of topography going on there, so there are spots where there will be some stairs and ramps, but particularly at the Chestnut and Walnut edges, really tried to make those, really did some kind of structural ingenuity there to try to figure out how to make that connection better.
I can't find them.
What's that?
And then I want to touch a little bit on back onto South Street in terms of circulation, just so kind of everybody sees what
So
the
here's the
intention
whole
is
bus-
here.
Doug,
Yep,
yeah,
I got it.
I'm sorry.
I
Go
saw
ahead.
it. No, I saw what you're doing. So the idea is that this is going to continue on the shared space that exists today over 95. What we did do very purposely, if many of you have probably been on the existing South Street pedestrian bridge there. There's some public art. There's lots of things kind of on the bridge with you that makes it not conducive for dedicated kind of multi-use path with bikes and everything like you might see on the Schuylkill Banks Trail. We have designed this bridge with the intention that in the future, if that bridge or when that bridge is eventually reconstructed, that it would allow for a more dedicated shared multi-use path space. But it is an intention that this would follow the precedent of every other kind of ramped structure by the time you get to the end there, that would be, you know, ask folks to walk down there because it'll be quite a ramp, obviously, to get everybody down to the bottom there. But then you connect into the Delaware River Trail where you do have dedicated space for pedestrians and bicycles. So the park itself, I want to talk a little bit about some of the land uses, some of the kind of major things that are happening on the surface of the park. The first is what should look most familiar to folks when you hopefully first go visit the park, which is the memorials. They currently exist kind of oriented towards the Chestnut and Front Street side. Their relative same footprint is existing, but they are shifting to the south. They're actually being mirrored, and are going to align closer to the Walnut Street side. What this does is that it allows for a space for the memorials on the southern end of the site, and puts some of the other amenities that we think are going to have kind of higher, more active uses, the Rink Plaza and the Pavilion, near the Chestnut Street orientation, further on the northern side of the park. The Rink Plaza space is a kind of multi-purpose space that can evolve with seasons and programming, and really is a really flexible space. The Pavilion and Cafe, we'll show some renderings of this. This is a really beautifully designed by Karen Timberlake, who is on the team. Just beautiful building on top of, really on top of the park. And right where the Pavilion and Cafe kind of ends, that is roughly where the park itself stops becoming relatively flat once you get on from Front Street and starts to tilt down towards the river. This will become evident in some of the renderings we'll show. But along that tilt are two main features. One is the amphitheater, which is kind of oriented to the northern side with views of the Ben Franklin Bridge and closer to what eventually will be the Durst development. On the southern side, near the Seaport Museum, will be a series of terraced gardens that help kind of resolve the topography as you descend down the park. In between the gardens and the memorials too, I want to touch on a play area that is really nestled into what really from this angle looks like a grove of trees. And that is something I want to talk about, that having trees and having the feel of a true city park exist over top of a highway was no small feat. And a lot of the work that has gone in the past number of years has been to figure out exactly how to do that. So for those that are interested, this is a diagram showing the kind of innovative trough structure that was developed to both hold the highway up at a clearance level that allowed for highway, all the traffic clearance to go on underneath, and the flexibility that I talked about earlier, but also allow for large trees, utilities, stormwater, all of the sorts of things that are regular components of a park, but kind of take for granted that they're just on endless fill. Here, we have to be really efficient with our space. So here, I just want to show a few renderings, kind of evoke the kind of atmosphere and scale and look of the park when it is fully built and being used. So this is from the gardens to kind of terraced gardens coming down. You see the pavilion and the cafe to the right. And then in amongst the play area, you see this kind of grove of larger mature trees. Here's an image of the, in summer, of the pavilion and rink area. Again, showing its, what it can be used for in various seasons. Here it is in winter. It's DRWC's intent that Winterfest will have a new home up here. And a lot of the kind of most beloved amenities, and this is very important as we were thinking about what was going to happen on top of the park, a lot of the most beloved amenities that we heard about from folks are being preserved on top of the park. Here is an image, a rendering of the interior of the cafe. If you can look through those windows, you can actually see the river. And because of its location, as I mentioned before, kind of right at the edge of that park, right before it starts to tilt down, you really get the sense of this is almost like you're kind of at the prow of a ship, right? You have this amazing view of the bridge and the waterfront kind of uninterrupted, and kind of behind you and to the sides, kind of buffering from the neighborhoods, it's all the kind of trees and landscaping. And one of the reasons actually that this building can be, essentially more jewel-like and kind of as its placement on top of there is what you're seeing here is a cross section of, you see that kind of innovative structure there over Columbus Boulevard and I-95. And then you see that we've placed a lot of the support services in back of house of the cafe and the pavilion underneath, kind of essentially where the fill section is, which would traditionally just be filled with dirt, in order to provide all of those services and not have to have vehicle access and loading and services, all of that happen on top of the park. Here's an image that's under the breezeway. The cafe is to your right, the pavilion and kind of rink support spaces are to your left. And this breezeway is kind of the main north-south axis kind of through the middle of the park, where if you go to the right, there's an amazing water space there, and then it starts to tilt down either towards the amphitheater, your terraced gardens, and to the left are the play area and the memorials. So that's a lot. That's a lot of all the work that we've been doing the past couple of years. I hope that for most of you that were able to attend some of our past public meetings, are able to see some of the feedback that you gave us kind of transformed into the design. And in a space, in a design project that has a lot of constraints from multiple vantage points, we have tried very hard to find a balance between all of those things that we've heard are important for folks. The other thing that we've heard is very important to folks is what, the refrain of, yes, we get it, this is going to be beautiful when it's done, but what is our life going to be like during construction? So we want to be as transparent as possible. And the first thing we want to talk about is detours. And detours are necessitated when there will be overnight closures of the roadway, either on I-95 or Columbus Boulevard. And the overnight, I do want to stress, is that there are going to be no long-term closures or no long-term detours as part of this project. That's another innovation that a large number of the project team with Pennoni worked on the Vine Street Expressway cap that is in front of the library. If any of you were familiar with that during its construction, really was innovative in its use of overnight closures to minimize impacts, both kind of above at kind of street level and as well as underneath for traffic. So that is our intention here. That is the model we want to follow. Overnight detours during the week, not on weekends, again, to minimize disruptions. And then the detours themselves, we wanted to make the distinction between regional detours and local detours. Regional detours, and what's shown on the map, and I'll walk folks through this in a second, are really focused on trucks and really focused on the interstate system, these long through trips, and making sure that those folks, if they're going from Maine to Florida, how are they going to get around this closure? So what you're seeing here, the idea is that the detours would take people, if they're coming from the north, to use Vine Street Expressway over to 76, and then down either to the Platte Bridge, or if they're going into New Jersey, they can either cross the Ben Franklin or come down at 76 and go across the Walt Whitman, and kind of working the same general direction in reverse, where they can get off in 95 North, just past the airport to get on 76 to go that direction. And so that's what's intended for the regional detours. And there's a whole supporting system of ITS, intelligent traffic systems, signage, and things that will all be working in coordination across the region to make sure that this is all communicated to drivers. But what we're going to go into a little more detail here is, I think, what will be of more interest to folks joining us tonight, which is the local traffic detours. So what we're going to show here is the kind of, first is the, draw your attention to kind of the red blocked area where it says area impacted. So that's the kind of limits of the kind of acute closure that will happen overnight. And so this is what you're seeing on the screen here is for I-95 northbound. So what will happen is there will be signage to get off at the Columbus Boulevard, Washington Avenue off ramp near Wharton, just south of Washington. Get off there to get onto Columbus Boulevard, where you'll continue all the way north up into the Summer Street on-ramp, which is just past the foot of the Ben Franklin Bridge to get back onto I-95. So that's for those folks, traveling I-95 northbound for local detours. This is how we anticipate that working. So southbound, working in the other direction, folks coming south at I-95 will get off at Callow Hill, the off-ramp, take a left onto Race Street to come down to Christopher Columbus Boulevard, where they will continue on just off the page here to the Morris Street on-ramp. That's just before the Target when you get down there. And that's how we anticipate detouring folks going I-95 southbound. And then the detour for when Columbus Boulevard is impacted. You see there's two different shades of blue here, one for northbound and one for southbound. So if you're coming south towards Columbus Boulevard, we'll be detouring folks from Callow Hill over to 6th Street, down to Pine, and then around hooking back onto Columbus Boulevard. And going northbound, having folks take left Spruce to go to 5th, and then back down Race over to Columbus Boulevard. For the South Street Bridge detours, where the area impacted will be right there. For folks going northbound, the darker blue line, anticipate using Washington Avenue, going north on 5th Street, coming across Pine to connect back into Columbus Boulevard. Coming southbound, using Spruce to 6th, down to Washington, where it'll pull you back into Columbus Boulevard. Do want to note that with the South Street Bridge, because there are obviously local businesses and things like that happen within those kind of those red and orange dash lines, that local traffic will have access, or those businesses will have access to local traffic, even during those overnight detours. For those that are attempting to go through, will most likely face a U-turn situation during those overnight detours, but you can get right up to the edge of those to access any of the local businesses. So we thought it was important, obviously, to run through those detours and kind of let people know, what we are thinking in terms of, how traffic impacts will happen. Again, to stress not only the kind of path of those detours, but the limited time of those detours being concentrated around overnight detours. And again, that, when the project kind of starts in earnest in terms of construction, I'm sure many of you will have some questions around, the kind of general staging of construction, some things like that. That is something that we are continuing to work on. And obviously, for some of you may be familiar that when it comes to kind of large projects like this, especially within I-95, a lot of the specifics around construction staging we can dictate, but some of it does happen with coordination with whoever is the actual whoever the contractor ends up being for this project. So next steps, before we get to some questions, because I want to make sure that we can kind of address folks in any questions and comments you have. We're going to continue our coordination with stakeholders like yourselves, the city. There's obviously there's a lot of stakeholders that are both close to this park and this area, and there is an ongoing outreach by DRWC. If you have not been to the Park at Penn's Landing website, it is a fantastic rendering-rich resource to find out what the park's current design is looking like. All the renderings you saw from us today can be seen on that website. And then is our intention in the kind of spring and summer months, especially as we get closer to construction, to have a kind of larger public meeting that really focuses on the issues transitioning from design into construction, because we know that will be something that is going to be incredibly important to folks, especially folks that live right next to this site and are going to have to kind of live with it during its construction. Before we get into discussion, I just want to remind people of I-95 Revive. You can follow this link to the to our page on Sector B, which is the kind of internal PennDot parlance for Sector A is the part of I-95 north of Ben Franklin Bridge that's currently in various degrees of construction across its stretches. And Sector B is the section of I-95 from Ben Franklin Bridge south, essentially to the Girard Point Bridge. And the footprint of the cap is inside of Sector B, hence that. And then the Park at Penn's Landing, which is DRWC's website for this project, is really a tremendous resource for folks who want to see more about what's going on there. All right. Went through that relatively quick, and that's a lot of stuff. So I do want to make sure that there's time here. I can leave my screen to share in case folks have any questions that require kind of referencing a slide. And I see that there's all on my screen is I see chat, and I see the number 33 next to it, which implies that there's been a lot of chatting. So
Yeah.
Doug, thank you so much.
Yep.
That is a terrific overview. I would ask, I guess I could just emphasize that for people who really want to spend more time trying to absorb some of the things that Doug has said, I encourage you to go to the websites where I think most, if not all, of the displays on our screen tonight will be found. So I encourage you to do that. Now, we do have a lot of questions. I think I was a little bit naive in thinking that I could have people ask their questions live. So I am going to ask people to continue to use the chat function if you do have a question, and I will do my best to relay those, or actually I can do it, or Doug, do you think it would be better if one of your own
yeah, I'm looking through the
think
chats
that-
now, and I see actually
Yeah.
Elaine
been
and
some
Debbie have been
answers.
all over this,
Right.
responding to stuff, which is great. So I don't know, Elaine, if there's like themes or anything specific.
Well,
should bring up?
so some of the questions, originally when you started the PowerPoint, the questions were coming as you were covering the material. So, South Street, we answered, who is going to do the maintenance to snow removal. South Street will be a PennDOT structure, PennDOT owned structure, and we'll have a maintenance contract. I think the access to, maybe like you said, the slides were gone through sort of quickly, but the South Street Bridge extension, the new tide arch, comes down to a corkscrew landing. And once you get off that landing, you can go north and south on the Delaware River Trail. So I don't know if you want to just put that slide back up. That would answer that question.
Can folks see that slide? Can you guys?
Yeah,
we're
so I
not
think
seeing
the-
I don't know that we're seeing the corkscrew. Let me get my chat.
the
Oh, the
last-
corkscrew's on the right. I'm going to go to this one.
Yeah.
Here. This is where you can really see it.
the overview, yes, please, thank you.
You can see there where it's
So
kind
the
of
next-
at the
if
level
you-
above. So that's in
Your
plan,
next slide,
and
yeah,
then there
sorry,
it
Doug,
is,
you have a
corkscrewing down.
couple slides forward. If you go a couple slides forward, you show the directions where people come off and they can go either way. I didn't know if
Oh,
that would be
this
helpful.
one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you have to keep going. Sorry. Yep, there it is. So that's like from the overview, and hopefully that makes sense. So hold on.
I
There
guess for
was-
that, Elaine, should we just mention that the existing stairway and ramps that come down into the parking lot will remain in place? Maybe just to clarify for everybody.
That's a very good point,
Yeah.
right? So coming off of the existing South Street Bridge, Doug's pointing out the existing stairs
Yep.
will remain. So people will be able to get down to the parking lot.
We thought
Barring,
that,
of
that made a lot
course.
of sense to, if you park there and still want access to South Street, you know, that obviously made sense and just added to the connections.
While we're on the
So-
subject, if you don't mind my just interjecting, you know, this could be quite an attraction. What about parking? What about the just general impact on traffic in the area?
Good question.
So two questions, right? In that, like, I think you're thinking long-term.
Yeah,
Traffic on the
I'd
boulevard.
like to
and
be
then also-
optimistic that this is going to be realized and people are really going to want to come, and, you know, where do they park if they don't use SEPTA? And what will be the impact of that traffic in the surrounding areas?
Right. So yes, and there's a couple of things that you bring up in that. Parking, we're working with the city and also with DRWC. I mean, this area is also, you know, managed by a group for PennDot and the city. So there's thoughts of expansion, right? Or thoughts of, you know, levels out there, and how to address that moving forward, especially when, you know, construction would start on the mainline 95 project, you know, years from now. So I think, you know, planning ahead is what everyone has in mind for parking out here. So I can't say specifically that, you know, we know exactly what we're doing with that, but I think we're looking at leveled parking. The other part is SEPTA's, we're working with SEPTA. They've got their bus revolution ongoing, and I answered a quick question about that, that there are bus routes. We are maintaining SEPTA stops and bus routes within the project limits that are going to be affected during construction, and in the long term, providing them locations so that along the cap frontage on Chestnut Street, they still have that route that's a major route from the city, coming out Chestnut and then Penn's Landing Road connector back down Market Street.
And that obviously is involving some coordination with DRWC and the future Durst development there as well.
Right. So how that all, you know,
Both to both enhance the transit access, but also address, I think, maybe some of the parking concerns that can be symbiotic to whatever the needs for the Durst development are. That's certainly an avenue that we're looking at.
I have one clarification for this drawing. I know we're showing the SEPTA circulation on the top side through Chestnut and Market, but just to clarify that there is, you know, a bus route along Christopher Columbus that will continue, and there's bus stops along there on
Yes.
on the lower side as well, and they will continue.
Could we go to the screen that shows the detouring during construction?
Sure. Which was there one specifically you'd like to?
The one that showed traffic from 95
Mhm.
being detoured depending on the direction onto 5th and 6th and Spruce and Pine. I really
Yes, okay.
wonder about all the traffic from I-95 flowing on those
Okay.
streets.
I guess the only clarification I would make is that no 95 traffic is being detoured into that. The only detour that would be using the kind of 5th, 6th kind of Pine and Spruce are when just the surface street, the Columbus Boulevard section is being detoured, either at South Street Bridge or up here near the cap. Any of the I-95 detours are only being detoured to Columbus Boulevard. None of those are being detoured into the neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That
And maybe
helps.
maybe we could just clarify what those detours are for. So obviously there's the existing structure over 95, which is the park, the memorials today. So demolition of that will require closure of 95 and the detour. And then the detour is really placing beams above the roadway, whether it's I-95 or Columbus Boulevard. And for Columbus Boulevard, we will need to close, do a full closure for that work right above the roadway. But once the beams are in place and it's closed up, the contractor will be working above, we won't need to have that closure at night. And again, we're planning them during the week. So it's the traffic that's on Columbus after 11 p.m. during the week, because we saw that there is an uptick in traffic on the weekends, and we're prohibiting the contractor from doing the detours on the weekends. And also during any special events. So we do have we call it a traffic management plan, and it identifies all those planned special events. And there are times that the contractor has to avoid that. But also there's a phase where there's coordination to take place when the contractor requests the closure, so that if there's, obviously other events that are missed on the list and such, that, there's not a closure during an event. Just to give you some background.
That's great. Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah. So if we went to a couple other questions, there were a couple of questions about noise, right? So on the cap itself, I don't know, Doug, if any of the renderings will show it, but you maybe could just put a cap overview slide on, and we could just point out. So there's a north side and a south side. There's the Walnut on the south side, and then there's Chestnut Street that borders it on the north side. Along both of those roadways, there will be clear plexiglass noise walls to protect both ways, right? It'll protect from some of the noise on the park getting out, and also protect the park from the noise coming from the highways and the streets below. And while you're on this slide, there was another question about the trees, what types of trees, green trees. So maybe just in general, I don't know if Ken can give a quick synopsis, and then the height of the buildings, right? Is it,
I saw that one.
1.5 stories or 2 stories? While we're on this slide.
Ken, do you want to address the tree type? Tree types,
certainly.
I should say.
Certainly. On the bridge deck, there are 3 different types of groves, which will be composed of oaks, maples, and ginkgos. As you move eastward beyond the bridge deck, sloping down to the river, it will be more open. There will be trees, but fewer trees. There'll be a variety of specimen trees, primarily deciduous specimen trees, some ornamental trees in the garden. In terms of the other plantings that have come up in various questions, it will include multi-purpose lawn spaces. There will be grasses, perennials, ground covers. The gardens are meant to have a variety of textures, colors, to really accentuate seasonality, to attract pollinators, birds, butterflies, insects, that really kind of give it a richness in terms of color, texture, and sort of nature, and those kinds of experiences.
And then on that note, right, there was a question about tree support for when someone has to dig up a utility line, the service lines, right, or to the building. Any of the main trunk lines will be in the city streets where there won't be any trees. I think we're going to have that utility system mapped out for the future maintenance of the cap.
Absolutely. We're coordinating very closely with the engineering team on the distribution of all the services relative to the planting, so that we don't have those kinds of problems and the utilities are easily accessed without having to damage or interfere with the tree planting system.
As part of the beauty of that trough system that we talked about earlier,
right,
too, that lets us do that.
To set up the trees in that, and then we can put all the.
Does this help? There's a question about the height of
and the other bays of the bridge adjacent to it. Can I ask you to go to the height of the building? Yeah.
Yes, that's right where I was going. Again, everybody see this? This is, I went back to the cross-section slide that shows. Does it look a little blurry on?
Well, I just mean the height, to read the height, but I can give it to you.
Oh, it is. It's 20 feet.
Right.
It's 20 feet to the top, not counting the kind of wooden crown bell over the breezeway. But
Very
the
symbol.
up to that spot right there is 20 feet. Now, and it is intended, I believe, to be kind of one floor, kind of one
It
space.
is.
I go,
Correct.
there
Yeah, high
it
ceiling.
is, the kind of clear height space. Now, obviously, the service and stuff that's happening underneath, you see there's multiple levels. So it'll be two levels below that. But in terms of what you experience on the ground will be essentially 20 feet to kind of like the roof line, 1-story building.
There's some offices on the, on the back of the pavilion that will have a little bit lower clearance, but the public, really signature spaces have that height.
So if we can go to another specific question, which, just takes you a little further east, right, from the buildings here, the overview, Doug, for the cap that might address the some of the amenities that we have along the waterfront face, right? They're asking about what we call resilience, right? The resiliency factor, how we've addressed, climate change and what materials, and keeping in mind, that we know that the water level, rise. And we've been working with the Planning Commission. Oh, Liz, you're going to correct me, right? Office of Sustainability. I'm not sure if that, involved anybody else, but we have several agencies.
And the water department,
oh, right. Yes.
floodplain manager, a lot of folks, helping us understand what the, obviously not just current, but what the kind of future, flooding implications are for the park. It can say, how we've kind of very overtly addressed it here is anything that is within even the kind of most aggressive models that were coming out of through PWD. Anything that was in there essentially as the water could rise up the kind of slope of the park, in terms of like what types of materials and things were in there. There was a lot of thought given to like making sure that those areas could withstand flooding to whatever extent possible, as well as not become not catch debris. I know this is an issue that happens sometimes on the Schuylkill, or really anything when the water gets up to a certain level. You don't want, for example, the esplanade to be designed in a way that it's kind of catching logs or things done like that. So there was thought given into that, careful thought given into that edge and really up the slope where we think into the future that there's going to be, the possibility for flooding impacts there.
Right. So there's a couple of questions in there that I don't know that we necessarily have answers, but it's not to ignore them, right? So they were asking about, let's do a couple, because I think we should maybe go back and just revisit the detours and see if there's anything that's still a question about that. But we show the cap here, and they're asking about a dog area somewhere. And I know that we don't have planned on the cap. There is still waterfront real estate, right, and adjacent to, and there's, other right-of-ways. So I think, and I'm not going to speak for anyone, but we're a combined partnership, right, with the city and with DRWC on this project. So I don't know what the future plans are, but we are keeping that in mind because the question does come up. So it's not, if we don't have an answer yet, that it's being ignored. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that, but that's as.
I guess in terms of the dog park, I can say that through the outreach that was done and the first kind of large public meeting near the beginning of this process, as well as a series of focus groups that DRWC organized at the various neighborhood levels, the desire to have a dog park was often mentioned, but in fairness, there tended to be as many people for it as against it. And when it came to kind of looking at the kind of combination of amenities that were really kind of emerging as the real priorities for the space, a dog park was not part of that. And we've often found ourselves saying, yes, this is a large multi-acre park, but there is only so much space on the park itself. So there obviously we got tons of feedback of really amazing ideas for what could be included in a park, especially a park in Philadelphia on the waterfront. But they couldn't all be accommodated. I know that's maybe not an answer everybody wants to hear, but that is the kind of process that we had to go through.
Yeah, and it's not done. I think we're taking that, and as someone was asking about, what's going to happen, we have a future project, right, for the reconstruction of 95, and it's in a study phase. CAP is just the first construction that's very focused in area and limited. So some of the more larger issues like Follietta Plaza will be covered later with the Central South Philadelphia project that's in a planning stage right now. We're going to be in a planning stage for quite some time, so there will be time for a lot of comment about that. Can I actually, I think it was the funding of the project. I did say for everyone, the project construction is funded with city and federal dollars. State dollars are also part of the project, but not in the construction phase.
Elaine, can I just interject again? Forgive me, but I see a lot of concern about the impact of the detours on Spruce and Pine Streets. And I guess the question is, can Washington Avenue be used as the detouring way instead of Spruce and Pine, since that's two-way? And also, right now we're supposedly in the middle of a pilot project to make Spruce Street one-way eastbound, because really, because of the ATV problem and so forth, we're getting killed on Spruce Street. And now this detour will be simply adding traffic, not to mention traffic that's used to be going fairly quickly along Columbus Boulevard. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I wonder if Debbie could walk us through, Debbie, right, again in detail. So that, and then can I just point out that the construction year, we are in 22. We say 22 so that people realize it's a 4 solid year construction project, but we won't be starting until 23. But then they say, well, why is that 4 years? It's 23, 24, 25, and all of 26. So I think it's just a misnomer with the math. So we would be starting.
But I do want to, it's the balance, right? Of like this, from what it is today to those images is going to take 4 years. It's a silver lining here is that these overnight detours are not even remotely close to being 4 years in duration. And in fact, maybe Debbie, if you want to speak a little bit to like not only the kind of, we talked a little bit about, their overnight on weekends, but maybe the anticipated frequency and the kind of total length of disruption.
Yeah, durations would be good. Yep, good point.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a chance that the contractor will cluster them. So it might be, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They tend to be clustered. And it's just, again, for demolition and placement of the beams above. So there's the structure on 95. I do not have the figure of beams in front of me, but it would just take me a minute to look that up. So that would take place over the course of intermittently over the course of 2 years because of the way that we're phasing the structure. So it is stretched out, and and it won't be, there'll be time in between those closures, but I do expect them to be clustered on individual nights. The South Street detour that we were showing that's using Washington Avenue, that again will be just over the course of I'd say less than a year and a half, where those closures would take place, and again during those times at night. So I expect that the initial phase of the project from when we start construction, which is the beginning of 2023 into mid 2024, would be when these detours take place surrounding the South Street Bridge. And as Doug pointed out, we're allowing local traffic in there. We think it's important. We don't want impacts on the businesses in there. So we set up even the way we laid out where the cranes would be, et cetera, so that you can get into the chart house, you could get into those adjacent businesses without seriously impacting them. And it was designed that way. As far as the cap, I would think that those detours, let's say generally will start after the South Street ones, which again are just limited to the closure of Columbus. And then, let's say mid 2024, start doing some demolition on 95 for the existing cap structure. And then they would be intermittent there. Right now, we do have Spruce Street planned. We're aware of discussions of possibly changing the direction of that, and we can make that change during construction. And again, one of the things I want to point out with that, we can put some advanced signing at Washington Avenue. We're conscious just, again, of the businesses along there. That is our primary connection point just south of the construction zone. We have that as the detour. And again, it's overnight. And we can put some advanced signing at Washington though, so that to direct people, to potentially use that alternate route as a connection point as well. So we can put some additional signing at Washington, but we've coordinated with the city on these routes, and through a lot of coordination, this is the routes that we came up with. But if there is a change on Spruce, we can, we'll just make that adjustment during construction, and that's no problem.
These meetings typically last an hour, and I think that this has been, packed with very important information. I'm going to leave it to you folks, whether you think that we need a little bit more time to answer any other questions. I'm not sure we do, but I don't want to cut off the lines of communication here. So Doug, do you want to make that judgment? Or
Well, I would say this. I guess maybe if Elaine or Debbie, if you want to kind of look through the comments, I think we've gotten a lot of good feedback on the issues around the detours.
There is one for the 250-year celebration. We did do some coordination with the city on that, and that 250-year celebration team. I do not expect the park is going to be open necessarily. We're not planning on that being an integral part of that 250-year celebration. We had some coordination with the city on that. I think there's just going to miss that deadline for the 250-year celebration, which most of it's taking place obviously around July and in advance of that of 2026.
I guess, Larry, to your point, if there was any, were there any other things in the chat that we think we didn't cover? It'd be nice to just address it while we're here. I guess for us to stay. Yeah.
I'm skimming kind of fast. South Street was another one. Again, another question about the current South Street ped bridge, and there will be some rehab done to it. There'll be some improvements.
Yeah, state of good repair improvements done to the existing South Street bridge. That's what we've been saying, because we don't want to imply that it's not going to be completely redesigned. There will be a time when the I-95 main line needs to be revisited, in which case that bridge, or even in the interim if something happens. But at this point, there isn't anything wrong structurally with the bridge. It really is just a state of good repair, and connecting this new bridge to it.
There was also a question on construction and accessibility, I think, of those steps during construction of the South Street Bridge, if I'm interpreting the question correctly, which I may not be, but we're still working through the phasing and the details. But at this stage, we think that we may need to close the stairway for a short time, but during that time, the ramp will be open to the existing South Street pedestrian bridge. And we'll try to do that one or the other so that we don't close off access from the ILMAC, from the parking lot to that ped bridge.
Elaine, there was also a question about the future of I-95 in the Penn's Landing area, and I think it also goes to the longevity of the cap structure and the
Right.
way that you're designing it for the future 95 geometry. Could you talk about that just a bit?
Yeah, right. So Doug will probably help me elaborate, but basically the 95 reconstruction is to use the footprint of 95 today and use it better, right? So we're looking at shoulder lanes and consolidating interchange access points, trying to manage with the footprint that we have, not building out of congestion. So it's smart transportation applications, technology, signing, that sort of thing, and then using shoulder lanes. But the CAP took us a while to actually get the design and make those assessments. As the study and the CAP project were going on concurrently, we have evaluated the CAP so that there is going to be, and you drive underneath it now, you'll see a lot of supports holding up the existing CAP. We are going to consolidate those. We basically are building the CAP so that the future 95 reconstruction can work with the CAP structure we're building today. So there'll be just a divider, and you can see most of 95 there.
Yeah,
will
it's hard
just
to
have
tell,
those center
yeah.
support. There'll just be a center dividing the northbound and the southbound sides. And that gives us flexibility for use of the lanes and the shoulders. So we are doing traffic studies. We will have a master plan. Doug is also part of the outreach team. Actually, Pennoni is too, right? I mean, these groups are working on the long-term solutions and the alternatives analysis. So we'll have a public comment period coming up with a virtual meeting room where we can answer a lot of
That'll
those.
focus specifically on what's called I-95 CSP, which is the Central to South Philadelphia, which
South Philadelphia.
CAP
Yes.
is inside of, but is the larger things that Elaine was talking about. But for
So in a
better or worse, we are constrained by what we kind of refer to as the bathtub, which is the sunken section through here.
Yep.
There are no plans to widen
Expand.
that
Right.
and expand that. It really is exactly what Elaine said, which is to be smarter and more flexible about its use.
Right. So the CAP will fit within that footprint and it will accommodate the future. We've run those traffic numbers and the analysis enough to know that this will stay in place. And, you know, all of the rest, right, remains to be reviewed and evaluated and comment on. And that's what the public meeting will be about. I
think there was something
There was
about a tree selection. I wanted to maybe circle back to that. I think
the trees. Okay.
I don't know,
Yeah,
Ken, if you
there's
had.
traffic.
I think some folks had some questions about ginkgos.
Sure, yeah, I
'cause-
can just follow up on a couple of those points.
Yeah.
So first, I think it would be good to mention to everyone, we have been coordinating very closely and continue to coordinate very closely with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, who maintains the planting along the Delaware River on behalf of DRWC. I think it's probably apparent that this is a very unique condition. Planting on the bridge deck in particular is, essentially a massive green roof. So selecting materials that are appropriate and will thrive within this structure system is a particular focus. And so that is a major factor in choosing, urban trees in this unstructured condition. The ginkgo specifically will be using the male selection, so we don't have the stinky fruit that has been brought up. And we will be considering ornamental varietals such as redbud. Those will definitely be in the mix.
Okay.
Again,
I think that we've done a good job of covering things, unless, Elaine, anything is leaping out at you.
There's a question that, so here it was a little bit pedestrians. There were a lot of questions about bikes and motorcycles and such. The bike facilities, we're working still with Otis on, ironing out a lot of those details. I think the motorcycles was maybe a little bit of a reach there to be using bike lanes. But the one question was about the series of Philadelphia First sidewalk blocks to be preserved in the project. And I don't know that, I think what we're doing is taking into account within the limits of the project, how we're going to treat some of those sidewalks. Debbie probably could say, we had a recent meeting with the city streets department and how to make that frontage at Front Street, Chestnut and Walnut. We heard a lot about, speeding traffic and bikes and peds trying to use those spaces. So there'll be raised crosswalks. There'll be a raised intersection at Walnut. Chestnut has a lot of bus traffic and it would be complicated to try to do that there. I know that didn't exactly answer the question about Philadelphia First sidewalk blocks, but we will look into that a little bit further and see, where they stretch to or if they are adjacent to us. But the project is basically confined to this limited area.
There's a
there are a couple
question
of
about the level of environmental clearance.
Oh, see, I missed that one.
No,
Yeah. It says, is there an EIS for this project?
No, so this project minimizing right-of-way impacts, and I think so far, right? I mean, we're minimizing most impacts to the area, to the facilities, to the SEPTA, and we hope as well, right, to access points, bikes, peds, traffic, and not, I guess, exacerbating any of the existing conditions, other than there might be some heartache during the construction phase that we're hearing about, and we'll look into the detours again. But the level of environmental clearance for this project, according to the NEPA National Environmental Protection Act, is only a categorical exclusion. So we are still, like Doug said, we are still partnering the two together so that CSP, whenever the larger 95 project goes out to a public meeting, we will still be able to capture, comments about the CAP project. So we're very cognizant of, receiving any public comment that we can. And that's a lot, it's a lot less formal than an EIS, but it still hopefully will capture and cast a wide net. And we have very few.
Address, there have been questions about maintenance, sorry.
Yes, I saw you jumped in there, Liz. Yeah.
Yeah. So the only thing I would say is that there's very few historic and environmental impacts with the project. So it qualifies as the level of categorical exclusion. Sorry, Liz, go ahead.
Just asking if DRWC could broadly just explain the maintenance and how that's going to be addressed.
Okay, so as DRWC would jump in, right?
They're on the call, and that's city DRWC.
So maintenance of the structures, right? I think we have that one slide, Doug, very, very beginning. That might be helpful, is just not to go backwards all the way to restart, but sorry, Liz, and I didn't mean to talk over you. I have a little bit of a delay on my end.
There are two, I think to Elaine's point here, there are two types of maintenance that are going to be occurring as part of this project. One will be the responsibility of PennDot, which is the maintenance of the bridge structure, essentially the piece that's kind of interstate highway piece, that's all the structural components and infrastructure. Then there is everything that's on top of that, essentially the top side amenities above that structure. All of that will be managed and maintained by DRWC.
So if there's anything to add to that, I mean, other than there's one entity, like Liz said, DRWC, that will be responsible, and the city will be the park owner.
Well, I am going to simply, hopefully gracefully end this session. You guys are fantastic, and I thank you so much. This is a wonderful project for our city, and you're undertaking a tremendous responsibility. I'm sure you've spent burned a lot of midnight oil dealing with this project. You didn't answer the most important question, which is, what flavors of ice cream are being served in the cafe, but I'm going to spare you that. and simply thank you again, and encourage people to participate in the future public meetings. Go to the website for the development of Penn's Landing, DRWC, and so forth. This session has been recorded, and it will be available on the Society Hill Civic Association website, and we'll publish a link in our weekly blast. And with that, I want to say a good evening to everyone, and thank you all for participating. We had up to 190 people, I think, at some point.
Yeah. Larry, if we could get access to that, if you would just, if Doug and you could coordinate so that we can cover all the questions that were asked during the meeting. I mean, we should be able to get the chat.
Okay, be happy to do that.
Okay, yeah. So Doug, if that's okay, that way we'll be able to capture
Absolutely.
questions we didn't.
Okay,
Be able to put frequently asked questions up on our website.
right. Wonderful. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank
Have a
you.
pleasant
Thank you,
evening,
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.